6 centuries ago, a nobleman was accused of unspeakable crimes, ritual magic, murder, and children vanishing behind castle walls. History tried to bury him, but his story survived, not in the archives, but disguised as a children's fairy tale. As strange as it sounds, the crimes of this 15th century monster are believed to echo behind the tale of a young bride, an enchanted key, and a room that must never be opened. Tonight, we dare to enter it. Welcome back, my darklings. The candles are lit, the night is waiting. So let's revisit the tale that has haunted us for centuries. Once there was a wealthy nobleman who lived in a grand, isolated estate. His riches were the talk of every village, rooms draped in silk, servants always at hand, and a garden so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. Only one thing unnerved his neighbours. The man's beard was an uncanny shade of blue, unnatural, almost otherworldly, and though he was charming, generous, even handsome, that strange blue beard made people whisper. He had been married before, several times in fact, but each of his wives had mysteriously disappeared. Still, when he turned his attention to a new young bride, her family, impressed by his wealth, encouraged the match. Soon she found herself living within his fortress-like home, surrounded by glittering treasure, and a husband she barely understood. One day, Bluebeard announced he must leave on a long journey. Before he went, he handed his wife a ring of keys. She was free to open every door in the house, wander hall after hall, admire all the wonders he had to offer. But then, his finger paused on one key, small, iron, simple. This door, he warned, she must never open, no matter what. But when he left, curiosity began to gnaw at her. Days passed. The forbidden key seemed to call to her, quietly, relentlessly. At last, unable to resist, she found the hidden door at the end of a quiet corridor. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. Inside was a chamber, cold and silent, the floor slick and dark. And there, in the shadows, she found the bodies of Bluebeard's former wives, laid out like broken dolls. In her panic, she dropped the key. When she picked it up, it was stained with blood, and try as she might, she could not scrub it clean. The stain was magic, a mark, evidence. When Bluebeard returned, he immediately noticed the key, the accusation it carried, and he condemned her to join the others. She fell to her knees, begging for time to say one last prayer. Just a few minutes, she pleaded. Bluebeard agreed, and she tried to stall as long as she could, for she knew her brothers were due to visit her today. But Bluebeard grew impatient. Taking hold of her hair with one hand and lifting up the sword with the other, he prepared to strike off her head. At that very moment, the doors burst open. Her brothers charged into the hall, cutting him down where he stood. But the tale remains, a warning whispered to young brides, about curiosity, about obedience, and about the door you must never open. The story of Bluebeard, as we know it today, comes to us through a French folktale recorded by Charles Perrault and published in 1697. But Perrault didn't invent the tale. He was a collector, gathering old oral stories passed down by word of mouth by nurses, travellers and village storytellers, then polishing them for the Parisian literary salons of his day, social gatherings where intellectuals, artists, and aristocrats mingled to discuss ideas, art, and literature. It may seem surprising, but the fairy tales we now associate with childhood were originally meant for adults. They only became children's stories centuries later. Perrault preserved some of the earliest written forms of stories we still tell today: Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Puss in Boots. Yet he was also known to add small flourishes of his own to these stories. Little Red Riding Hood, for example, didn't wear her famous red cloak until Perrault dressed her in it. Many scholars believe the same is true of Bluebeard's most striking detail, the beard itself. To Perrault's audience, a blue beard would have signalled something uncanny, a mark of the unnatural, perhaps even the demonic, telling readers at a glance that this husband was not what he seemed. It was likely Perrault's own flourish, added to make the villain instantly memorable. He also liked to end his tales with neat moral reflections, gently steering readers toward what he believed was the proper interpretation. In Bluebeard, he offered two, one reassuring readers that such murderous husbands belong to the distant past, and another warning that women's curiosity is dangerous and may bring about their own downfall. So when we read Bluebeard, we're not seeing the tale's beginning, but a late, carefully shaped version of something older, a story that must have existed long before Perrault wrote it down. And that raises a question. Where did Bluebeard come from? Because unlike most fairy tales, Bluebeard has no magic in it, no wishes, no transformations, no talking animals. It all feels disturbingly real. Some historians believe the answer lies in a real nobleman, a man whose crimes were so monstrous, so impossible to comprehend, that they lingered in memory long after his name vanished from polite society. A man called Gilles de Rais. Gilles de Rais was born into extraordinary privilege in 1405, heir to one of the wealthiest and most influential families in France. By all appearances, his life should have been a triumph. As a young man, he became a celebrated knight, fighting alongside Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War. Chroniclers describe him in glittering armour, riding at her side into battle. When Joan liberated Orléans, Gilles was there, a hero of France. By his early 20s, he had achieved what most nobles only dreamed of: power, wealth, prestige, and royal favour. And then, slowly, his life began to darken. After Joan's execution, Gilles withdrew from public service. He retreated to his remote estates in Brittany, where his immense wealth allowed him to live without restraint. Extravagant spending, feasts lasting for days. He sold vast tracts of land, burning through fortunes. He staged lavish theatrical productions so excessive they bled his estates dry. As his finances declined, his behaviour became increasingly erratic. He turned to alchemists and sorcerers, hoping their forbidden knowledge might restore his wealth. Then, children began to disappear. At first, it was only whispered, a local boy gone missing, a servant's child never returning home. But over the years, the pattern grew difficult to ignore. Dozens of children, mostly boys from poor families, were said to vanish near his castles. By the 1440s, local clergy and nobles had heard enough. An investigation was launched, and Gilles de Rais was soon arrested and put on trial. The accusations were staggering: kidnapping, torture, murder, and ritual practices steeped in dark magic. At his trial in Nantes, several associates testified that he attempted to summon a demon named Baron, performing rites that blended Christian blasphemy with occult ritual. Some accounts claimed he believed that spilling blood might bring him wealth or favour. Whether these confessions were truthful, coerced, or coloured by political motive remains debated, but their impact was devastating. Under threat of torture, de Rais confessed to abducting and murdering scores of children. He was found guilty of heresy, sodomy, and the killing of, by some reckonings, more than 100 victims. He was executed later that year. History remembers him as one of France's first known serial killers, a man whose fall from heroic knight to something unspeakable seems almost too extreme to believe. It's no wonder then that for centuries, people whispered that Gilles de Rais was the true Bluebeard, the nobleman who murdered behind castle walls. And yet, for all the horror, there is one problem. Gilles de Rais did not murder his wives, nor is he known to have kept a hidden chamber filled with corpses. Instead, his victims were said to be children, so if Bluebeard was a memory of a real man, Gilles de Rais doesn't quite fit the story. But there is another, a figure whose life aligns far more closely with the forbidden tale. To find him, we must travel deeper into Brittany, to a man known as Conomor the Accursed. Conomor the Accursed ruled in Brittany sometime during the 6th century, a warlord whose name survives only in fragments of legend and monastic record. The stories tell of a violent and ambitious man, restless, paranoid, and haunted by prophecy. According to medieval accounts, Conomor married a young woman named Tryphena, a princess famed for her gentleness and beauty. But soon after the wedding, Tryphena made a terrible discovery. Hidden inside Conomor's castle was a secret chamber, and inside it the belongings, and in some versions the remains, of his previous wives. Each had met an untimely, unexplained end. The legends say that the spirits of these murdered women appeared to Tryphena and warned her that she too would die, especially if she became pregnant. For Conomor feared a prophecy foretelling that he would one day be killed by his own son. So when Tryphena conceived a child, her worst dread began to take shape. She fled the castle, but Conomor chased her down and killed her. Some sources say by beheading, some by stabbing. But her story didn't end there. A holy man, St. Gildas, is said to have found Tryphena's body and miraculously restored her to life. She later gave birth to her son, who grew up and fulfilled the prophecy, slaying Conomor in battle. It is a tale strangely close to the bones of Bluebeard, a murderous husband, a young wife in mortal danger, and the truth hidden in a locked room. For folklorists, this makes Conomor a far more compelling candidate than Gilles de Rais. But the difficulty is that the story of Conomor exists in a blur between history and legend. Almost everything we know about him comes from the lives of Breton saints, biographies that mix fact with miracle. What seems reasonably clear is this: Conomor was a real 6th century Breton warlord, likely active in the northwest of modern-day France. He appears to have been a violent, expansionist ruler, fighting neighbouring lords and ultimately being killed in battle. Some accounts say he rose to power by murdering a predecessor and marrying his widow. Later tradition claims he tried to kill her son, a political threat to his rule, and that may have evolved into the legend of a man murdering his own wives and children. The details vary wildly across sources, but they all agree on one thing: Conomor was remembered as a cruel and tyrannical figure. So is Conomor the original Bluebeard? Perhaps, but his legend hints at something even older. Because long before Conomor or Gilles de Rais, stories were told about forbidden chambers, dangerous husbands, and prophecies that doomed children before they were born. The "don't look inside" trope appears in some of humanity's oldest stories. It is one of our earliest narrative warnings, that knowledge has a cost. Take the book of Genesis. Eve is tempted by the serpent to eat the forbidden fruit, not out of malice, but because she wants to know. In that moment, she opens the metaphorical door she was commanded to leave shut, and the world changes forever. Here, just like in Bluebeard, curiosity becomes the spark that ignites catastrophe. The same pattern repeats in Greek myth. Pandora is given a sealed jar and told she must never open it, but curiosity overcomes obedience. She lifts the lid, and all the evils of the world, suffering, disease, death, spill out, never to be contained again. Again, a single forbidden act, a moment of human curiosity, breaks a boundary that cannot be repaired. Where Bluebeard's bride opens a door, Pandora opens a jar, but the structure is identical: temptation, transgression, irreversible consequence. Even the legend of Conomor the Accursed has echoes in ancient Greek myth. King Acrisius learns a prophecy: he will one day be killed by his own grandson. To prevent it, he locks his only daughter, Danae, inside a bronze chamber, a room she can never leave. But fate finds a way. Zeus enters the chamber as a shower of golden rain. Danae conceives Perseus, the child who will eventually fulfill the prophecy and kill Acrisius. The parallels are striking: a sealed chamber, a ruler terrified of his own bloodline, and the child who fulfills the destiny he tried to prevent. No matter the culture, the result is always the same. The forbidden room is opened, the fruit is eaten, the jar is lifted, the prophecy is fulfilled, and a terrible secret, once hidden, forces itself into the light. For this reason, many folklorists argue that Bluebeard is not merely a story about one cruel husband, but the survival of an ancient narrative skeleton, a tale told and retold for thousands of years about taboo knowledge, female agency, and the danger of looking too closely. Folklorists classify Bluebeard as tale type ATU 312, the Maiden Killer, a narrative that appears in many variants. One of the most famous is the English tale Mr. Fox. in which a young woman visits the castle of her betrothed and discovers a bloody chamber filled with dismembered bodies. She escapes and later exposes him with the chilling refrain, "Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold." Shakespeare alludes to this story in Much Ado About Nothing, where a character remarks, "Like the old tale of Mr. Fox." That single line proves the tale was already well known in the 16th century, predating Perrault's version. Another European cousin is Fitcher's bird, collected by the brothers Grimm in 1812 but believed to be far older. In this version, a sorcerer abducts three sisters in turn. He gives each a key and an egg and forbids them to open one particular room. The first two do, and find it strewn with bones and blood. Their eggs drop into the gore, becoming permanently stained, a mark of disobedience that seals their doom. The sorcerer kills them. But the third sister is clever. She hides the egg, revives her murdered sisters with a magical salve, escapes by disguising herself as a bird, and destroys the sorcerer. Again we have a forbidden chamber, curiosity, corpses, transgression. It's the same bones, just rearranged. The story of Bluebeard may well be the evolved, warped memory of a real-life killer, but it has likely been blended with older folklore motifs to create the fairy tale we know today. A story we tell to remind ourselves that monsters do not only dwell in magical forests with green faces and jagged teeth. They can be charming, respectable, handsome. We may even marry them, because in the end Bluebeard lives wherever truth is locked away. But if you thought Bluebeard was dark, wait until you discover the 2,000-year-old secret of the Headless Horseman. The story begins long before Sleepy Hollow. Click here to watch it now. See you in a future video.